actually speaking to us? Do I think that it's a divine idea that's coming through my mind, or is it the mind chatter itself going? We've talked about that. What voice am I hearing? Am I hearing that egoic human voice, or am I hearing the divine voice? How do I know if I make a decision that I'm about to make the right decision? How do I know that the direction that I'm taking in life is the right direction? How do I know if the decision that I make is going to be the right decision? So it's always this, how do I know? How do I know? How do I know? Anyone relate to that?
Yes.
Yes. So in the Science of Mind textbook, Ernest Holmes talks about this over and over again, and where he says there's something within us that knows. The Bible tells us, he writes, the Father knows what things you need of even before you ask. That even before the prayer is prayed, the solution is provided. That before the question is asked, it is answered. So that's what we want to deepen into today, to really find a technique or two, maybe a word or an inspiration that you can carry with you for the rest of the week and your whole life, so that you can apply it, so that you can actually live it. So one way we might do this, I want to give you a couple of examples, is we might ask for a sign. Anyone ever do that? God, if this is right, just give me a sign. So the book, actually this talk is based on this book by Dan Wakefield called How Do I Know When It's God? Okay? And so he has these few different examples. So this would be a sign. A woman's going out with the same man for several years, and she wants to know if she should marry him. So she's praying for a sign. God, give me a sign. If this is the right person, just give me a sign. And so one day she's on the floor praying about this, and she sees the sunlight come in, and there on the floor it looks like it's a letter. And it's the first letter of this guy's name. So she's thinking, that's a sign. So is it a sign? Is that divine guidance? Or is it simply the sun shining through the window casting a shadow? Another way we might seek to know is to look to logic, for all those logical people out there. I'm not really being one of them, but you know, I'm working on it. A man wonders if he should take a job in a different place. A really good job. It pays more money, but it requires him to leave his friends and where he lives, the town that he really likes. And so he makes a list of all the pros and all the cons, and sees which one outweighs the other, trying to figure it out. The greater number on one side, is that the right thing to do? The best course of action? Or he wonders, should each reason, each word, or a reason why he should move or not move, have a whole dissertation to it. So he gives it numbers. You number it. This is a logical mind. I don't know. But even if he did that, and it all adds up, the answer, what is the answer? He still doesn't know the answer. Which course should he follow? There are all these positives why he should, but still the question remains. Or we may seek the advice of therapists, of practitioners, of ministers, of friends. You ever ask your friend, what do you think about this? Even though you might within know the answer. And so there's anyone like Frasier? I used to love that show. Niles, remember his brother Niles? So there's just this one scene when Niles is asking love advice from this magazine telemarketer who calls on the phone. I mean, we look anywhere. We look anywhere for advice. Everyone we see, So, did you see yourself in any of those scenarios?
Yes.
A few of them, maybe.
Sure.
We all wrestle with this question, I think. We all wrestle with this question. What is the right thing to do? And despite the assurances that we are given by Holmes, because all of this New Thought stuff and all of this metaphysics and even the Bible, all of these sacred texts, sound wonderful. And we know exactly what to do when we're sitting there reading it. And then we close the book and we still say, what am I to do? What am I to do? So we still don't know. How can we be sure? If God speaks through us and to us and booms out instructions, we might say, well, that would be easy. I just heard the voice, and I'm going to follow that. But even the booming voice of God sometimes isn't enough. It still isn't enough. And I have an example. The hiker was, I had one last week with a cliff person, so we have another one this week. But like the hiker who was walking, hiking down a steep and narrow trail. And he fell off of the side of the cliff, lost his footing, fell off the side, grabbed onto a branch that was there, a bush sticking out, and he looks down and it's 500 feet below. And it was full of rocks. And so he looked up and he hollered, "Is there anyone up there who can help me?" You know, at that point, we become, if you're an atheist, you can become quite a believer. So the hiker looks down again, and he sees that it's 500 feet, but he's yelling out, "Please, someone help me. God, help me." And so he hears this voice. And he said, "Yes, son, I can." And he's stunned. "Is that you, God? Is that you?" "Yes, my son, the great I am," replied the voice. So relieved beyond belief to be hearing directly from God, the hiker was very assured at this point. So now he's got a connection. "What do you want me to do? I'll do anything," the hiker said. And the great voice replied, "Just let go." The hiker looked down again at that 500-foot drop, and he looks up again and he goes, "Is there anyone else up there?" That's kind of how we are with these decisions in our lives. What we are looking for is some form of guidance, some kind of guidance that we can unquestionably accept. So whether this wisdom and guidance comes from outside, but usually it comes from the God or the Spirit that theology calls discernment. Has anyone ever heard of that? Spiritual discernment. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you saw yourself in any of those examples that I gave, that the people have been searching for these answers throughout all ages. Everyone has been searching for these religious leaders, even saints, have spent most of their lives learning not how to do it themselves, but how to teach others. You can see that with all the Wayne Dyers and all the great, there's all these, they have the answers for you. So they're going to give it to you, and you're going to hear it, and you're going to go, yeah, and then you're back to your problem again. So it's not really a solution. In his book, How Do We Know When It's God, Dan Wakefield writes about Saint Ignatius of Loyola. So for any Catholics there, you might have heard that. Yeah. Well, he lived in the early 1500s and founded the order of the Jesuits. And he is considered by many to be an expert on spiritual discernment, a great authority on it. He even wrote a book that was called The Rules of Discernment, and had yet himself had trouble discerning for himself. It is told that although he was able, this is a story from the book, that although he was able to discern from daydreams that God was leading him into a new way of life, and that the Madonna came to him in a vision, he still couldn't decide whether to kill, this is in the 1500s, a Moor, M-O-O-R, who didn't believe in the virgin birth of Jesus, because he saw the Madonna. So this was he could not discern if it was the right thing for him to do to defend the Madonna. So in an argument about the subject, the Moor saw how upset Ignatius was getting and wisely hurried away. And so while Ignatius became more disturbed and more concerned that he failed to carry out his religious duty, this is the 1500s. Part of him really wanted to pursue the Moor, but he couldn't quite make the decision. He couldn't make up his mind. He couldn't discern. And this is a great expert on spiritual discernment. In other words, he couldn't really make a clear decision. And so what he did was he let the mule decide. He was on a mule. So the mule followed a different path, and so that was his guidance, and that's what he did. So Dan Wakefield wrote about that. He said, if it's that hard for St. Ignatius to discern whether to, if it's a stab a Moor in a theological argument, perhaps those of us looking for signs in patterns of sunlight, lists of pros and cons, and asking anyone who will listen for advice, let me finish it. Lists of pros and cons and asking anyone who will listen are not so stupid or hopeless after all. That's what he writes in the book. So if a great expert is what he's saying, someone that just devoted his life to understanding spiritual stuff, how difficult is it for us? And so the topic this morning, the topic is of spiritual discernment. How to know if we know. And I'm not saying that myself particularly have surpassed any scholars or religious leaders, but we're all figuring it out as we go. We're all figuring it as we go. And so when I ask myself, where should we start on this journey of awakening that you're all on, of knowing, this journey of knowing how to know? The answer that immediately popped into my head was, first and foremost, we need to develop the willingness to listen. To listen. We can't hear if we don't listen. So before we can attain spiritual discernment, before we can expect to be guided and directed to those right decisions, before we can hope to have a knowing that our choices are for the highest and best good for everyone concerned, before we can feel that our actions and activities support a life that is satisfying and joyous, we must first learn to listen. Get quiet. We are willing to listen when we are willing to commit to spending some time in meditation. I mean, that is always going to come up. It is key. It is key. We don't sit in meditation and really, open ourselves and be willing. You can ask a question in meditation and just let it be. You will get an answer. It will come through. Divine wisdom can only speak through to us. And that's where the knowing is. That's where God is. That's where the divinity is. It is within us. But if we don't give ourselves the time to sit and really practice listening as it comes through, we will never really, truly know. And remember that animals, Holmes talks about this, Ernest Holmes, animals have instinct, and they follow it. We humans have intuition. And we, if we choose to, follow that. And so how does it come through? Well, usually it comes through, and you've heard people say, I had a gut feeling, so I did it. So it's in the solar plex area, which has more intelligence than the heart or the mind. The intelligence that is in the solar plex area is so key. So when we get that, that is part of our the intuitive, still small voice within us, giving us the knowing, telling us how to make that decision. So in Science of Mind, Ernest Holmes wrote, the spirit within us is God, and only to the degree that we listen to and seek to obey this spirit shall we really succeed. And we all want to succeed. I know that we all want to live prosperous, joyful, happy, peace-filled, healthy lives. All of us. But first we must be willing to listen. And frankly, including myself, many of us forget that every once in a while, like my story last week. That's what happens when you forget it. You wind up in the hospital. And there's nothing wrong with you, except for your thoughts. Remember your thoughts. So A woman worked at a bookstore and was often amused by the combination of books that people would buy. So she found it particularly funny one day when a customer approached the checkout counter and had two bestsellers that she was buying. The first was called Conversations with God. No. The second had to argue and win every time. That's where we are, all of us in life. Like, I gotta win, so I gotta learn how to do this correctly. But here, let me listen to God. You know, so we're always in between those two books. So I had an idea that if I listened on Sunday mornings, just listen to that divine voice within that I would allow to guide and direct me in giving my talk. So meditate before, you know, which I do anyway, but even longer before I give my talk, so it comes to, because I go over the whole thing in the morning. And boy, just get up and speak. Did I put up an argument? Now, my whole body went into an argument over that, because what came up for me was fear. Absolute, unbridled terror. And the fear that, you might relate to this, I don't have anything really to say, just, gotta have my script. Get up without it, you know? So this is the ego, and I'm getting a divine message. Am I listening? It's all fear. All ego-based fear. And so it can show up in so many different ways in our lives. And of course, it is my fear that would cause all of those things to happen. So it's the fear that you're carrying about making a decision or getting the guidance to do something, because you can't do it. We're not alone here, right? We have a divine partner in life. We have a CEO of our life. So Holmes also wrote, fear blocks the more complete forgiveness of the spirit to humankind. Fear arises from the mental attitude, which limits the possibility and the willingness of spirit to give us the good we so greatly desire. Because if we were really clear of all of those old beliefs that we call blocks, all of that energy built up within us, we would just manifest automatically. So, and how do you know if you are willing to change or to listen, to hear? How do you move past it? Well, the first thing is to take baby steps. You know, that's another whole topic, is being really gentle with ourselves. You know, instead of beating ourselves up all the time, accepting ourselves and accepting our decisions. And when we listen to that voice, knowing and trusting that it knows everything, we call it the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent power of divinity. Well, if it's all of those things, then it's within us, right? We're created out of it. So Eric Butterworth, who we love, the Unity minister and author, authored a technique for times where this guidance is needed. And his technique was to close your eyes, to be still, and to say softly, with assurance, Father, I am listening. Or you just want to say Spirit if you got a thing with the Father thing, which I don't really. It's all divine energy to me. I am listening. I am listening. And then really sit in that silence and listen. And this is what he wrote about this technique. You will find marvelous guidance manifested in you. You will feel a sense of conviction, a sense of assurance, a sense of spontaneity, and you will be led. Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him and he with me. So as we are willing to listen, we come to the realization that our answers, our guidance, and our inspiration come directly from or indirectly. We might get a download right there of exactly what to do. But this has happened lots of times with me. I've been praying on a certain subject and doing something totally different. And boom, the download, the answer comes. Are we willing to listen to it? It could be by a conversation that you're having. It could be inspirational music that touches your soul, or something we read or see. And a lot of the times, these answers come in dreams. For those of you who can remember their dreams, you know what I'm talking about. You can get a powerful dream. Listen to it, because this is all the divine voice, if you will, coming through us. And it might not be a voice that we hear. It might be a feeling that we get, or a pull that we get. This is all getting to know how you know, when you really listen and trust that there is a power that is way beyond any intelligence that we could ever possess alone. So Ernest Hershey Richards wrote, and Fran Lefkowitz isn't here, but she loves this poem. I sent it to her. A wise old owl sat on an oak. You might have heard it. The more he saw, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why aren't we like that wise old bird? And here's a quick, are you willing to listen test? We are willing to listen. We are willing to listen when our focus is on truth, forgiveness, and the desire to remove blocks and resistance. That's all those old beliefs that we spoke of last week. To the expansion of consciousness. Are you willing? Are you spending time in spiritual practice? Are you willing to listen? We are not so willing to listen when we are absorbed by our problems, by trying to find solutions. We're still in the problem part. And that's the way we've kind of been brought up, to find a solution. Unless you're one of those people that like to stay in the problems, but I like to move out of them. So it's looking for a solution. Well, this is even a higher way of listening to the voice that will guide you beyond anything that you would think of in your own human mind. And we all have it. Every single one of us has it. Think about that then. Think about, are you willing to listen and hear spirit? Are you truly, really, it's not a bunch of words. This is something you can actually apply in your life. Are you willing to listen when that guidance comes through and recognize it? You can only recognize it if you practice listening to what it feels and sounds like. Because you won't know, otherwise there's so many thoughts going on constantly. So think about this as you listen to the closing words from Ernest Holmes as he discusses an individual who had the willingness to listen, perhaps even more than most people that have walked on this planet. So this is what Ernest Holmes wrote. Jesus spent much of his time communing with his own soul, for it is through our inner thought that we contact God. To this remarkable man, out of the silence of his own soul came a direct revelation of his oneness with God. Jesus was a new thought person. His oneness with God, back of the conflict of ideas, back of the din of external life and action, back in the innermost recesses of uplifting thought and silent contemplation, there is a voice ever proclaiming, "This is my beloved. This is my beloved." Seldom does this voice penetrate the outer world of human experience. This is still Holmes. Seldom do we allow it to perfectly express through us. We must learn to listen to this voice, call it conscience, intuition, or what we will. It is there. It is there. No one need go unguided through life. That's what Holmes says. No one need go unguided. You are not alone. You are not alone. And he also said, for all are divine at the center, and all are images of the Most High. So first and foremost then, in knowing how to know, which is today's topic, even though intuition is the same thing. Knowing how to know. First and foremost is mastering this whole, and it is an art of listening. Are you willing to listen? Are you?
Yes.
Yes.
So it is then.
Yeah.